It's interesting to note that Professor Tim Flannery, who is a climate change commissioner, is a representative or a spokesperson for the government on climate change. However, Tim Flannery has admitted that even if the entire world shut down all emissions overnight, it would still take another 1,000 years before there was any noticeable change in global temperatures. In Australia's case, the July government's insistence on introducing a carbon tax suggests, or they suggest, that a carbon tax will somehow help the world's climate. Well, unfortunately, Australia's emissions are only less than 1% of the world's total output of carbon emissions, CO2. So it doesn't really matter what Australia does, because it won't make any difference either in the short term or the very long term in having an impact on climate change. The climate change events, that is global warming, for instance, has crossed the Rubicon. It's crossed a point of no return, which basically means that climate change or global warming is out of control. And by out of control, what I actually mean by that is that it doesn't matter what humans do now, it won't make any difference. The climate will keep getting worse, temperatures will keep rising foreseeably for the next 1,000 years. It's suggested that global temperatures will increase by 4 degrees Celsius over the next 100 years. 4 degrees Celsius may not sound a hell of a lot, but it is a diabolical amount in percentage terms, and its dramatic effects on climate throughout the world. But getting back to the carbon tax in reality is exactly just that, another tax, another means by which the average individual will be further ripped off by this Julia Gillard government under the pretence of expecting that this tax will actually have a material effect on climate change. Well, I'm afraid the Julia Gillard government is in a dreamland, a dream world, because it doesn't matter what Australia does, it won't have any impact on climate change. Australia could disappear off the map overnight, and that won't make any difference to the global warming scenario that is now currently in train. So what the carbon tax would actually do for the average Australian is increase living costs at the start of around about $17 per week. That is $17 per week additional cost to Australian consumers under this proposed carbon tax legislation that is yet to be introduced. It's also a Greens policy. The Greens party has actually pushed Labor or forced Labor into trying to implement this tax. It should be remembered that before the previous election, Julia Gillard actually said quite explicitly, quite openly, that there will be no carbon tax under my government. She said that over and over again before the last election. Now she's been elected, and elected, by the way, with the help of the Greens and the Independents. Now that she's been elected, the Greens, Bob Brown, of course, has been pushing her on a carbon tax for the past couple of years. Well, now that the Greens are holding the balance of power, they've actually forced Julia Gillard to make a public policy whereby Julia Gillard is forced to say to the Australian people that yes, we will be introducing a carbon tax, but she's sort of in denial about the fact that she repudiated that idea before the last election. So hence she is referred to as Julia, Prime Minister Julia Gillard, because she told a great big lie, a great big porky before the last election that there would be no carbon tax. But anyway, getting back to the actual implementation of it, even if the carbon tax went ahead as is planned, even if all their wishes were fulfilled, it still won't have any impact on climate change. And so the Australian people will be paying an extra $17 to $20 a week for no change at all to the climate. Exactly. So people are being ripped off. They're being conned into thinking that reducing emissions in Australia will have an impact on global climate. Now the gentleman over here says that it will have an impact. Now, Professor Tim Flannery made it very clear in several interviews that it doesn't matter what Australia does, and at the very best, if Australia implemented a carbon tax, there may be a 1,000th of a degree difference to the world's temperature in 1,000 years. Wow! So for the next 1,000 years, we're going to be paying $20 to $50 to $100 a week extra for absolutely no change to the world's climate. So what's the point?
Do you believe what comes out of that?
You cannot stop the acceleration of global warming. It's out of control. If the whole world ceases CO2s overnight,
they could leave that tent for us if they like.
Be good an awning like that, wouldn't it? Even a permanent metal one. They could open they could have a sunny one here and a shady one here. It'd be better. Summer gets so hot here, man.
It's ridiculous. We can close down industry across the globe. You don't understand. The climate change now is a self-fulfilling cycle. It feeds on itself. Don't you understand that? It's out of control. Once something's out of control, it doesn't matter what you do, you can't stop it. I mean, this is the whole point. It's too late. It doesn't matter what we do. You can argue all sorts of things. It's out of control. We can jump up and down, day and night, and have wonderful little ditties and one-liners and everything about how it won't happen, how it might happen, how it should happen. Oh, if we do this, it might do something. I mean, it's out of control. It's fit. There's still there's no point. We just keep going on as we are. The only thing we should do is cut CO2 emissions as best as possible over a 20, 30, 40-year period, because you've got to do that anyway to at least try and do something for the very long term. But that's right. But the problem is, even that is not going to make any difference. That's a sad fact. No, but I mean, if all humans disappeared off the planet overnight, if humans just disappeared, the problem is the climate cycles are now out of control. They feed on themselves. Once you go beyond a certain point, it feeds on itself.
You got food?
That's right, we can't control it. That gentleman's finally said it, we can't control it. This is what Tim Flannery has just admitted. That's the whole point. It's out of control. Doesn't matter what we do. Doesn't make any difference. So Julia Gillard's tax is just exactly that. A carbon tax, T-A-X. It's got nothing to do with climate change. It's just another way of getting revenue.